In the wake of Andraste's death, worship of her god, the Maker, spread to the far corners of Thedas. Worship of Tevinter's dragon gods was outlawed and faded into obscurity. Many of the tribal peoples Andraste Maferath had liberated also converted, though outside the imperial Chantry of Tevinter this took the form of 100 different cults, each with their own doctrines and beliefs. A few of the free elves of the Dales even incorporated Andraste and the Maker into their ancient doctrine, teaching that Andraste had been raised up by the Maker as a peer of the elven gods. Andraste's sermons and those of her followers were committed to writing, written and rewritten with dozens of variations on the same text between the various sects. But Andraste and Maferath also left a more traditional legacy behind, their children. When they were first wed, Andraste was considered too frail to safely bear children, but a powerful chieftain like Maferath was expected to have heirs, so Maferath took a concubine named Gillivan and had 3 sons by her. By all accounts, Andraste treated the boys as if they were her own and adopted them after Gillivan's death. After the prophet's death in 170 Ancient, Maferath brought the Alamari south and divided his new empire between his 3 sons. The eldest of Maferath's sons was Isarath, seen as perhaps the most just and capable of the brothers. He was given the lands of the Syrian peoples west of the Frostbacks to rule. He saw potential in his subjects, but found them too culturally disparate from one another to properly form a united kingdom. He forced the Syrian to unite as a singular tribe in what he called the Grand Unification, and married a Syrian tribeswoman named Jeshavis. He called his new nation Orlais. After Maferath's betrayal came to light, Isarath and his brothers avenged Andraste by murdering their father. Isarath was able to maintain his power in Orlais. He had sufficiently distanced himself from Maferath's legacy in the eyes of his subjects that he could rule in his own name, though some remained bitter over his forceful unification. The youngest brother, Verald, was not so fortunate. Maferath had divided his northern conquests between his youngest sons and given the central planocene of what is today Navarra to Verald. He was a weak and hated ruler. Verald clung to power by invoking Maferath and Andraste's legacy. When Maferath's betrayal was revealed, not even his role in his father's death could secure the loyalty of his subjects. Verald's entire court was murdered, and he barely escaped with his life. He took refuge with his elder brother in Orlais. Verald's weakness was an opportunity for Isarath's wife, Jeshavis. The Syrian woman had tolerated the Grand Unification, but resented the foreign rule of her people under an Alamari. She manipulated Verald, convincing him to seize rule of Orlais for himself. He murdered his brother and all of Isarath's children. Verald married Jeshavis to secure his power, but she killed him as well in short order. Jeshavis became the first Syrian ruler of a united Orlais and ruled over Orlais independently for 42 years. The middle son of Maferath was Evrian, who was entrusted with the lands directly north of Ferelden that are now known as the Free Marches. He was perhaps the most pious of Andraste and Maferath's children, devoting more time to spreading his stepmother's faith in his land than to consolidating rule. Evrian immediately disowned his father when the betrayal came to light, and dispersed his lands among the local tribes rather than cling to power. Thus no sense of common culture or identity developed among the people under his rule. Although 2 of his children were killed for claiming a connection to Andraste and Maferath, Evrian is the only son of the betrayer whose bloodline may have survived, though they have faded into obscurity. Despite Andraste's initial weakness, she proved strong enough to bear 2 daughters with Maferath. Ebris and Vivial were hidden from the public eye and never put forth as heirs, in deference to their elder brothers. Both were forbidden from marrying, though both had consorts. Ebris inherited her mother's frailty and died of plague in her late 20s. She had 1 daughter, Alivamar, who married but died without having children on a voyage to Denerim, less than a month after her mother passed. Andraste's other daughter, Vivial, fell in love with a Tevinter mage named Regulin, a cause of much controversy with her family and the Alamari that ultimately led to their self-imposed exile. We know very little about her bloodline for two reasons. Vivial had only daughters, and their daughters had only daughters who all took the names of their husbands. It is suspected by some that all the women of Vivial's line produced only daughters, which makes any attempt to trace her descendants through records over the past 1,000 years very difficult. No record of her descendants beyond the chaos of the Second Blight has survived. The second reason is that Vivial herself made a point to destroy records of herself and her children as they went into hiding following Andraste's death, often asking local cults of Andraste to help her in this. Long after Andraste and Maferath's descendants had faded into obscurity, faith in the Maker persisted. By 130 Ancient, the various cults had organized Andraste's teachings into collections of hymns and songs, the first versions of what would come to be known as the Chant of Light. In around 100 Ancient, a loose collection of Andrastian hardliners formed the Inquisition, also known as the Seekers of Truth, who worked to fill the void of security left by the First Blight and the dissolution of Tevinter by the Alamari, with a particular focus on protecting people from the dangers of magic. Some say theirs was a reign of terror, others that they have been cast in a negative light because their impartial investigations into mages and common folk alike crossed too many powerful groups. Eventually, a new cult of the Maker called the Chantry was founded by the ambitious leader of a new empire in Orlais. The end of the Ancient Age is marked by the naming of its first leader, Divine Justinia I, who took the name of a childhood friend and close follower of Andraste in the first year of the Divine Age. In the coming centuries, almost all of Thedas would be brought under the formalized orthodoxy of the Chantry. Even the Inquisition would be folded into the organization as its martial arm under the Navaran Accords of 120 Divine. The Imperial Chantry of Tevinter accepted the laws and authority of the Orlesian Chantry as well, for a time at least. The Chantry would not well remember Andraste's alliance with the Elves, however, as tensions between Orlais and the pagan elves of the Dales eventually led to the destruction of that kingdom in 220 glory under the banner of an exalted march, named in honor of Andraste's march on Tevinter. Thus did Andraste's faith come to dominate a continent, spreading from the Ferelden Valley to the wastes of the Anderfels. It remains one of the few things that can bind the peoples of Thedas together in the face of existential threats, like the Darkspawn or the invading Qunari from the north. Alright, I haven't done this in a while, but I'd like to go over some fuzzy parts of the timeline I noticed as I was going over this. I'm partly doing this because I was surprised just by how young the characters involved must have been when I thought about it. First, remember that Andraste was born in 203 Ancient, so she was 16 when she married Maferath in 187 Ancient, and then was kidnapped into slavery. Let's assume this is when Maferath took Gillival as a concubine, so Isarath would have been born in 187 or 186. So he must have been only 6 to 7 years old when Andraste invaded the Imperium in 180. So he was only 16-17 when he started uniting the Syrian tribes, so he would have been 26-27 when his brothers killed their father, and he died however long after that it took his wife to talk his brother into murder. These children all must have grown up mostly on the march with the Alamari army. This is a bit confusing because the in-universe source for Andraste's daughters claims that Vivial went into exile with Regulin when Andraste marched on Tevinter, but she couldn't have been even 5 years old at the time, so that doesn't seem likely. The World of Thedas Volume 2 just says they left before the betrayal, but she still would have only been 14 or 15 at most when Andraste died. Andraste herself would have been 33 when she died. I find myself trying to imagine the family dynamic here. Maferath and Andraste return home from a day of fighting and preaching to their tent, and 5 pretty young children waiting for them. None of the sons would have been old enough to actually fight until the last few years of the march. And that's it, I think. I think I did an alright job summarizing Andraste's legacy here. There's more to be said on the Dales and the Chantry and Tevinter and the Inquisition, but those deserve a more focused handling on their own. Again, let me know what other topics you'd like to see covered, and watch my other videos.